And then they took all of overtime. Yeah. 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 That's the way it works. I was watching it through my fantasy football app, just watching my players. I was like, Joe Mixon has the ball again. Okay, here we go. And then I was like, overtime, here we go. Hey, I'm a Jake Browning fan. He went to the University of Washington. No, but that's where I live. Yeah. And we'll see what happens. He wasn't so great when he came in against Pittsburgh, but when you don't have time to work with the offense and having a whole week makes a difference. We could start, but we don't have notes, so we'll let him come back and print those. Ready? No. You're busy time of year, isn't it? All those extra packages. Interesting. I can only imagine. $21 straight. Do they have enough people? It's one of the reasons my brother changed professions. He was up in Middletown. He's like, they just didn't have enough people. So yeah, some guys are like that. More power to them if they want to do it. Have at it. But you're essential. You have to work through all of that because you're essential. So we had bad weather. Nobody else is on the road, right? Yeah, that's crazy. What I mean, what is so important in the mail? No offense, but people can't just wait the next day. But, right.
You just have to point out your
Can I have
concern.
one? I didn't bring one.
I'll not pick you.
I can teach from my phone, but I cannot read that small anymore.
You go into the Hamilton courthouse, don't you?
It's the last hurrah, so we got a full room.
Last time I fell asleep in my bed, my laptop was left
I
open.
have a spare. This is only from last week. Hello, hello. Richard's got him, I think, or he had him. Don't get too tight over there, Stan. You got to come up here and lead our song this week. Oh, I see. That's how you're going to play that card. I see how it is. Let me see how it is. I have no idea if this thing is working or not, but it says I'm green. So pretty sure I'll get a text if it's not working. So, all right, good. Well, let's go ahead and pray. And then we're going to start by watching Brother Stan lead a song while I play the piano. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some more fundamentals of conducting, specifically more in a choral context. And then practice some conducting, answer any questions, and then send us on our way. Well, let's pray. Father, we thank you that we can come and have this time. I thank you for all these fine folks that have come out. I pray that we could be a blessing to them tonight. I pray that this would be easily communicated and that it would be a help. I pray that you would bless the fine folks here at Bible Way, and I pray that you be with preacher as he has his procedure on Friday, that you would give him relief and answers for the things that he's searching for. Bless our time now as we conclude in our music ministry tract here for Bible Institute. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So Stan, what are we singing?
It is working.
It's working. All right, I hear myself. All right.
Yeah, I know how to make it work.
100, that's all you know? 84? 84. Should have taken the under. I built a hymnal and I don't know the numbers of it, so it's all okay. 84. All right.
No sound.
Hey, you're the leader. Good. You led very well with your voice, but you were waiting for me. But you're the leader. You're the leader. Now, Silent Night's a little tricky because it's in 6/8, and theoretically we should do that in two, but it's so slow of a two that we feel like silent, like we're making days, right? And so a lot of people will just lead that in three, and so split the measure in half, two seconds. Silent night. That way, it's really hard to space out evenly long beats. And so if you sing six really slow, then people will sing it in two. If you sing it fast enough, silent night, holy night, that's not so bad. All is calm, right? But if you sing it slow enough. Oh, certainly. No, we should speed it up because we choose to sing it that way. And changing a congregation is a bit like turning a train. Um, if it goes that way, it goes that way. Or a cruise ship, maybe more aptly. But um, usually a musician will choose a signature that aptly fits the desired tempo that they have. So if they had wanted it to have three pulses per measure, or then they would have chosen, um, they would have written it in 3/4, and it would have looked twice as long because that's twice as many measures, and we would have performed it like a waltz, right? And if you think of a waltzing, you would feel that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We call that a triple meter because it has a very strong three pulse feel. Um, but because they chose 6/8, that is theoretically, according to music theory, a duple meter. It's a two pulse feel, and the only way you get two pulses evenly is to sing them fast enough. Now, there is a time signature that is a very slow two, and it is 6/4. I don't know if we have very many 6/4 songs. Um, 213 is 6/4. Not that we sing this one a lot, but if you want to look at it, it's a 6/4. Oh, 521. We know this one. 521. It's kind of the idea of, and I've not come up with a great analogy for this, but um, if you think about building materials, and you think of like, if you ever played Micro Machines as a kid, right? You got this really small scale of cars, and I know they're not really faster, but we can make them move fast based on their scale, right? Because they're so small. And so the smaller the note value, like an eighth note that a song is built out of, the idea is that it's going to go fast. So we see 16th notes in a song, we think that's going to go fast. But the larger the structure that we build it with, like 521, they build this out of half notes and quarter notes and dotted half notes. And so we're using larger denominations or values, if you will. And then that just takes a little bit more to, I'm going to use the word sludge, but you get to kind of sludge your way through it because you're using bigger materials. And so this is a 2 pulse pattern. By and by, when I look on his face. That is exactly probably how fast Grace Reese Atkins intended this to go. One of the reasons that she would choose this particular time signature is because if you were to say the poem out loud, you're gonna find that emphasis. By and by, when I look on his face, beautiful face, thorn shadowed face. And so she's going to put those stressed words like beautiful at the beginning of the measure and thorn at the beginning of the measure. If she had put this in 3/4, which would kind of feel the same tempo, but it's going to have a different pulse, we would sing it like this. By and by, when I look on his face. But that's not how she wanted it communicated. She wanted it to be by and by, when I look on his face. So you see how it spaces the emphasized syllables farther apart? Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't remember what number that was, but that's okay. So something like silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is fine. Round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild. And it doesn't feel like it takes as long that time, right? Sweet by and by, no. Sweet Hour of Prayer is my least favorite song to play and or lead because it's in 6, but we sing it in 3. And it seems like it takes twice as long as any other hymn to sing. Sweet hour of prayer, because it wasn't written that way. It was written, sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer. Now, you could make an argument that the context of the lyrics of Silent Night, silence, night, evening don't lend themselves to a quick, upbeat feel. 6/8 kind of has that riding a merry-go-round feel, right? Silent, I can't sing it. Silent night, holy night. You feel that up, down, like you're just cruising around a merry-go-round. If you're on one of the horses, not if you're on one of the benches, it doesn't feel that way. So yeah, it's interesting. Why do they choose certain time signatures? It gets very nuancy, um, even in piano music. There's some time signatures in here that are 2/2, 3/2. In some books, I don't know what Jesus Loves Me is in this book. In some books, it's in 4/4. In some books, it's in 2/4. It just depends on where they source the material from. But yeah, the fun deciphering time signatures and what people meant, that can be challenging. So let's look at the fundamentals of conducting, and then we'll do some conducting practice tonight. This is not going to take us super long to get through this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go pretty fast through these first 4 pages, and then we're going to kind of go through this excerpt of this choir piece that I have here, and we're going to go back and apply some of these things to kind of give you a little bit more kind of concrete understanding of what some of these things may be. Now, a lot of this is geared more towards if you're conducting a choir, ensemble, rather than a congregation. Specifically, things like dynamics and cueing and starting and all that stuff. They don't apply as much in congregational singing. But what is a conductor? Encyclopedia Britannica in music is a person who conducts an orchestra, a chorus, an opera company, a ballet, or other musical group in the performance and interpretation of ensemble works. Ensemble just means a group of people. At the most fundamental level, a conductor must stress the musical pulse so that all the performers can follow the same metrical rhythm. You're keeping the beat. The keeping of this rhythmic beat is accomplished by a stylized, I like that word, we try stylistic, set of arm and hand movements that outline the basic meter. Example, 2 beats to a measure as in a polka. You know, we're famous for our polkas here in the Baptist church. 3 beats as in a waltz or a mazurka. And then 4 beats as in a march. By the way, the last day of the year this year, the day of the waltz. Did you know that? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 12, 31, 23. My wife sent me that. I thought it was kind of funny. It's better than May the 4th be with you. All right. So, right. So it's 2 beats to a measure, 3 beats to a measure, 4 beats to a measure. In each case, the primary accent being indicated by the downstroke. And we've talked about that, right? How do you communicate where the beat starts over and you restart your count? It's that downstroke. A choral conductor has many aspects of music on which to focus, but their ultimate goal is that of communication. That's all a conductor is really doing. That's all a choral leader is really doing. It's just trying to communicate. And a conductor will use gestures to silently communicate and encourage unity in the areas of tempo, right? You're standing up there with the idea that you're going to get a group of people all on the same page, going the same speed. And how do you do that? In its basic form, right? You could clap it, but that's not silent. But that's the idea. You're trying to get everybody go this speed, right? Have you ever been in a setting where people are clapping to music and there's that one person that can't clap? If you don't recognize that there's that one person that can't clap, you might be that one person who can't clap with the beat. But that's what you're trying to do, and that would be the basic, most rawest form of everybody keep the beat, right? Um, Not only tempo, we're trying to encourage unity in dynamic expression. Dynamic is a fancy word which simply means volume, and volume changes. If someone says, make note of that dynamic, what they're saying is, watch out, there's a change in volume, a change in the loudness of the pitch. And also attitude. This would be like the stylistic preferences of the song. Is it a fast song? Is it a peppy song? Is it a slow and smooth song? Is it a march, a fanfare where it has a little bit more strictness to it and a little bit more bounce to it, or is it something that's very lyrical and flowy, like "Oh Holy Night" with its long drawn out da 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 da, right? These long passages, and you're trying to communicate that visually. The other thing that they're trying to do as a conductor is help initiate sound. When do we start singing? And we do that visually with that drop of the downbeat. Or if it happens in a different place, maybe we bring them in on an upbeat. And then not only sound initiation, but sound release. And that's the technical term for cutting off the sound, releasing. And so you have what they call the attack, which is when sound starts, and then you have the release when sound stops. But in addition to conducting the group, a conductor will also run each rehearsal, teaching and encouraging the learning and execution of the chosen selections and making preparation for public performance. We get that. They're up there to help get people ready for accomplishing and executing this piece that they have been practicing. But an effective conductor will strive to master both verbal and non-verbal communication. It's one thing to be able to stand and say to people, okay, we're going to do this. And that's very important. You have to be able to communicate if you're going to stand in front of people and lead them in any capacity. But the problem is once the music starts, you can't say anything. You can mouth things, and sometimes it's right. Sometimes you just can't do anything other than be like, right? But even that is accompanied by some kind of a gesture. We use hand gestures all the time, right? This is just a more kind of universally accepted form of hand gestures that we use to communicate with musicians. You may think, I'm not a musician. It's okay. You can still communicate. Just pretend you're landing a plane at CVG or something like that. So when you're starting, if you're getting up there to lead people in singing, whether it's a kids choir, we just had our kids choir sing on Sunday night. My wife stepped in to fill in for Mrs. Price because she was ill. And so she wasn't standing. She was sitting there on the front row with the kids, and she was directing and leading. And as you're getting started, if you're going to stand up there in front of a group of people, whether it's for children's choir or congregational or at the nursing home, whatever, these are some kind of a checklist that you should go through in your mind. Is your posture commanding? Nobody's going to watch you and follow you if you're just, all right, right? You have to get a little bit bold and command the room. Otherwise, nobody's going to listen to you. And it's not about a pride thing, but somebody has to be in charge, right? And if you've been elected to be in charge, then we're going to follow you. Whether we follow you off the bridge or we follow you to success, the choir is going to follow you, hopefully. And if you don't feel like you can lead them successfully, then you study more and you practice more and work on some of those things. It's not as complicated as people think it is. And I think we can all work hard at things. And then as you assume, make sure your posture's good, you're standing tall and upright. And then you're going to check, is your arm or your hand position correct? And we talked about that, kind of that shoulder width apart, where you're going to hold your arms. And then what level you're going to hold. Now, if I was directing behind this lectern of this podium, I would have to be higher because nobody can see me if I start down here, right? You can kind of infer what's happening, but people can't see me. Or if something was in the way and the pianist couldn't see me, I would either have to move or what have you. When I was down at Crown College, our orchestra was down. So if you were the choir, then there's like 7 steps for the platform. The orchestra was down there, but they were all looking this way. But the conductor for the orchestra was facing the orchestra, so his back was to the song leader, and so he had a mirror. And I don't know if it was supposed to work, but it didn't seem to work. But he was supposed to see the song leader in the mirror and then do all that together. Well, I don't know if you've ever been in a setting where the musicians are like 60 feet from each other, from choir to piano to orchestra. Well, sound takes a little bit of time to travel. So if you were sitting in the wrong section, you would hear the orchestra and then the choir would come along after that. And then you would hear the orchestra and then the choir. They were never together. They tried to be together, but they were never together. It was a tad frustrating to the ear. So I took to sitting on the opposite side where I would just hear amplified sound, and I was happier as a musician. But is your arm and your hand position correct? Everything that you do from a song leading perspective should be in a mostly relaxed position. You introduce tension when you need it, but if you live in tension, you'll just get exhausted. If you're leading from your shoulders, like the chicken dance, flapping your wings, you'll get exhausted. But most of what you do is going to be in tension. So your hand position is just a nice kind of that loosely curved, just the natural skeletal curve of your body. I was actually refreshing in my choral conducting book today, and they recommended just placing your thumb right at your first knuckle to give a nice, clear, solid hand position. I'm typically a middle, right at my middle finger knuckle, but this feels somewhat natural too. And this allows the people to see the length of my middle finger, and that's what they're going to kind of watch for as you lead singing. We'll get into that in just a second. But you check yourself. What's your hand position? Are you in a good position? And this is important, especially when you're leading a group. When you're leading a pianist to start playing. Now, we don't do that in congregationals. They just play, right? We don't cue them to play. They just start the introduction. We bring in the congregation. We also don't have a lot of volume changes in congregationals. They sing. We want them to sing rambunctiously, enthusiastically, and that's what we like. But in a choral setting, if I want someone to start something like, right, then I would be doing them a disservice if I started them off this way, right? Why is that? Because what did I just visually communicate to them? As big as you possibly can, right? And you understand that the size of the gesture matters. And so number 3, as you're standing there and you're looking at the score, we just sang Amazing Grace, oh how sweet the sound that saved a poor sinner like me. We just sang that Mosey Lister song on Sunday morning. And when you stand up there to start leading, as the director, you have to think, okay, how fast do I want this song to go? And I'm going to make sure how loud I want this song to start. Do I want them to come in 100 miles an hour? Do I want them to come in enthusiastically? But I'm going to imagine that in my head. And if I want them to start like that example I gave you, then I'm going to, in a sense, count myself in by humming in my mind. Don't hum out loud, especially if you're in front of a microphone. It can get embarrassing. But I'm going to get myself to come in at that exact tempo. And then they will start. And that's the sound, because I can't produce a sound that I'm not expecting. Does that make sense? I can't get them to give me something if I don't know what it is. You say, I don't know how to explain what it is. No, but you can hear it in your head, and then your body can help interpret, well, how am I going to get a sound like that? And then you have to think, am I communicating the proper dynamic level? As you're standing there about to sing, okay, we have this introduction that she plays for our choir opener, and it's right. It's something like that. And if I want her to come in really loud, then I have to give her a very right. And I'm very demonstrative. And you'll even see it in my eyebrows, like this intensity, right? And that's all conducting is, it's communicating the feeling that you want. And if you've had any experience with body language whatsoever, you can start to do a lot of these things naturally. You're going to think through your tempo. Don't make a rough estimation of the tempo in your mind and then change it slightly in the first measure or two. You think through one or more sections of the composition of your piece before raising your hand to give that preparatory gesture. Remember that preparatory gesture is just that upbeat, right? You have to go up before you can come down. So before you give that gesture, and remember that gesture is going to set that tempo. If she's coming in on beat one, my pianist is going to determine how fast she goes by how fast I go up. If I go boom, she's going to go boom, boom, boom. She's going to repeat that like a bouncing ball, right? But if I go up, she's going to continue at that tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in my mind, I'm already counting my tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So I know that my speed of my hand making that journey is going to communicate that proper tempo. Keep in mind, the opening measures of a song may not provide the most reliable feeling of the correct tempo. Often, a section in the faster notes or a stronger rhythmic section will be a better guide. Sometimes you can just start in a song by in your mind jump into the chorus. And it's all because of God's amazing one. And then I would bring her in. But in my mind, I've thought, and it's all the other way that you can make sure you have good tempo is practice. Practice helps. Doesn't make permanent though, but it does help. Another way that you want to make sure that you bring people in as you're getting started with your piece is you have to make eye contact. They will not come in if they're not looking at you. Won't happen. They'll come in late. It happens all the time. But it's not necessarily their fault if I stand them up and then I don't look to see that they're ready before I bring them in. So I would stand them up and I would have them stand, and then I would look and make sure everybody's looking. And then we'd start. Now, that's important to do with your musicians for sure. I'm not going to drop my hand until I make sure my musician is ready. I have one choir pianist. She will not lift the pedal from her previous song until she's ready to play. And so I know that's kind of my cue. I don't necessarily have to look at her, but I will look at the Miss Mara and see if she's ready. She's kind of peering around the music rack at me, and then we'll make that eye contact to make sure that we're ready. And then as she's playing along, then I will look at, here comes the music, here comes the introduction. I will look at my choir and then see that they're looking at me and bring them in. So you can do a lot with your eyes so that they can sense your concentration and your readiness. They can also sense your facial features. Okay, how are we coming in? Are we coming in with this jubilant feel? Are we coming in this very kind of reserved pullback? Convey the tempo with your preparatory gestures we mentioned before. How fast you move sets the speed. So those are some things that you should think of when you're starting as you're leading a group. What else are you conveying as you're leading a group? You're conveying this style. This is the style of sound you want them to produce. These are the two main stylistic, or they call them musical articulations in particular, well, really any instrument can accomplish this. It's a little bit harder on voice. But we have the staccato style, which literally, it's an Italian word, it means short and detached. I think of it when you're talking about vocally, I think it's very succinct. It would almost be like talking like silent night, putting gaps in between every syllable. That's that dry, it's a very dry sound. When you're trying to communicate, in fact, you know this, well, let's pick a song that has, we have Onward Christian Soldiers in here. this is that very kind of militaristic march feel, right? And if I'm going to try and get you to sing this with that kind of peppy, moderately dry feel, 573, then I am certainly not going to do this. And remember, sometimes when you're thinking about communicating, some of the most effective ways to communicate is to think about how I wouldn't communicate this. If I wanted you to sing this in the chorus, Onward Christian Soldiers, and I wanted you to sing this short and detached, I wouldn't do it, right? This is too flowy, too loopy, right? But if I wanted you to sing this, here's your note. On, everybody sing on with me. On. Okay, there's your note. Here we go. Everybody ready? Here we go. And I want you to get this kind of short, distinct, detached feeling. I'm going to have a very angular motion, right? None of this loopiness. I'm going to have on. Here's your note. 1, 2, ready. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as. Now change with mirth. Keep going. With the cross of Jesus. Do you feel the difference, though? You started holding out those words as opposed to with the cross of Jesus, right? And usually you don't split up multiple syllable words and sing half a word over. But do you see the difference communicatively, visually? That very straight lines and almost a very pokey, pointed point of attack. And that is that kind of staccato feel. The travel, this is the technical definition of staccato style. The travel should make a definite stop at either the ictus or after the rebound from the ictus. You may remember from our time discussing, about keeping a beat, that ictus is that point in time when the beat happens. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and you can feel that, right? And then after that, you have a little bit of a rebound. Now, the rebound of a dry, angular staccato style is much shorter. In fact, they call that a click beat afterwards. The word ictus is actually the Latin word for to strike. Strike. You feel that? Just that strike, as opposed to like a push or a guide, right? You're hitting something. And so when you want that dry sound, you're going to have a very duh, 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 duh. The opposite of that, which if you were to play this on an instrument, strings would play it somewhat pizzicato, not plucking, but they would have a very their bows would be very succinct, right? And they have a bow, 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 bow. It'd be instead of these long, drawn out, flowing bows. For staccato, for piano, they wouldn't use the pedal. Which is totally different than the opposite style, which would be much more smooth and connected. And I would use the pedal if I wasn't standing up. It's hard to pedal while you're standing. But you can start to hear the difference. So the second conveyed style that you might want to use in your choir piece would be this legato style. Now, how do you tell the difference? A staccato, when it's called for in your piece, will have little dots opposite the stem direction. And so you might have something like this. And here we'd have ta, 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 ti, ti, or ta, 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 di. But if I wanted all of this to be smooth, I would put them in what we call a slur grouping. A slur is a curved line that connects notes in a musical thought or musical phrase. And then so this slur indicates legato or smooth. And so we'd go from ta, 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 ti, ti to ta, 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 di. Ta, 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 di, ta, 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 di. And that might change from to. See how each one was much longer? But how do I visually communicate that? If I want a choir or a pianist, or if I want a cellist or whoever, how do I communicate that? My travel now is it's a much more fluid, much more round, think of cursive versus I lost my mind. What's non-cursive? Print, right? Okay. Think, right? Those have very straight, hard lines, right? Versus cursive, which has this very flowy, everything's connected. That's right. You don't have to lift your pen. Supposedly faster. For me, it's not faster. It is if you don't want to read it. No. So if the dot is to the side of the note, that is value. So in 578, those on over, if it's to the side, what you're doing is you're increasing the value of that note. You're not influencing. They won't be in here. It'll be more of a, and you don't usually get staccato a lot in vocal music. Sometimes you do, especially if you're doing like um, more concert choir stuff with like a high school. You're singing a song that most of our sacred songs don't require that level of dry. But if you were leading like a small ensemble or your orchestra and you had an arranged piece for them, you might get some stuff that's really, really dry. And you would look for those above, above or below. To the side means that they're going to add value. So this goes from one beat and the dot adds half of its value. So now we've gone to 1.5. And so if we were here, that's 2 beats. And then I'm going to add half of 2, which is 1. So now I'm up to 3. So yes, the placement of the dot makes a big difference. You won't find the staccatos in here. Certainly not for congregationals. Good question. It's a language. It certainly is a language, but as with any language, the younger you start, when you get that neuroplasticity, right, the brain's able to consume all that, and they don't think about it because they're not putting it in framework, right? It's like, well, what is this? I don't have anything to compare that to, and that's what we do as adults. When we learn something, we try and make analogies in our mind to remember things, right? Kids don't do that. They just well, that's what this means. Well, why? I don't know. As adults, we can totally understand the why. We just don't remember it as quickly. So kids might not know the why, but they know that it means, and then later they will catch all of that. So the legato style, this is where you really get it in choirs. Here's a song 656 that I might sing a little bit drier. I will say this: the faster a song goes and the more syllables you have to spit out, uh, you can kind of encourage your choir to sing a little bit more dryly, just because it helps them. Wandered in the shades of night till Jesus came to me, right? Versus if everybody sang that wandered in, you might not. It'll sound like marbles in your mouth. You might not get a big crowd to enunciate that clearly enough. So you might have something like I wandered in the shades of night. Da, 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 da. That's how I'd play this if I was playing it congregationally, to kind of give that feel. And then when I got to the chorus, I might smooth it out a little bit. Sunlight in my soul today. Gives it a little attitude. It's a very interesting way to communicate. So how do you communicate that smooth style? You move your hands slowly. I thought this was really interesting. Number 3 there. If you're struggling to go smooth to the next destination of your beat pattern, you can pretend that you're resisting an elastic band, and you can really feel that you're pulling against that or you're pushing against that, and that'll help you smooth that out over time, because it can be hard to judge, okay, how fast do I need to travel to get to the next place? And we're going to see that here in just a second. Ambidextrous conducting. Do we have any ambidextrous people in here? I'm not ambidextrous by any stretch of the imagination. I am 99.999% left-handed. The only thing I can do right-handed, if you want to consider it, besides playing the piano, is throw a frisbee. I cannot throw a frisbee, but I can throw one right-handed, and it's so weird. But I am predominantly left-handed. So when I first started conducting, it felt so weird to use my non-dominant hand. I just felt I felt like I was trying to throw a baseball with my wrong hand, which feels so incredibly awkward. Anything you try and do with the opposite hand for most people feels incredibly awkward. But I think it's important if you're going to get into some heavier choral conducting to be able to do things separately with your hands rather than have them tied together. And there are some neurological things that make that a little bit complicated. We like it when hands mirror each other. That's okay. We feel like we can do that. The brain just interprets that, no problem. But when you try and get one hand, like if I had to do this, I know this looks weird, but it feels weird too, because that's not the mirror of what my other hand is doing. And if I had to do something different with this hand, then it's the whole can you chew gum too. It really does feel like that. I was talking to one of my young piano students today. She's probably 13, and she was learning a new concept. She was doing polyrhythms, one rhythm in one hand and one rhythm in the other hand. And she's like, "Why is this so hard?" I said, "Because your brain hasn't created that pathway yet. Right now, all the instructions to your hands are coming through one neurological pathway. And when you give one instruction to your left hand, your right hand's like, yeah, that's my instruction, but that's not the truth. She's trying to separate that, and you have to create those new neurological pathways. So if you are going to practice and serious about this ambidextrous conducting, it will be frustrating, but it will help develop flexibility and coordination, and it will one day, I promise, reduce awkwardness if you practice with your other hand. But here's why: if you're going to direct chorally, this is the most important reason to be able to use your other hand, is because you can keep doing one thing, and then you can bring in somebody else while you're still keeping a beat. Because I could stop keeping the beat and hope my musicians keep the beat, but they may or may not, right? Especially I'm at the point where I'm trying to slow everybody down, and then I need to bring everybody in. Then I need to have that freedom to bring somebody else in with my other hand. So ambidextrous conducting is needed for cues involving changing in dynamics, sometimes leading separate patterns, though honestly in a church setting we don't do that hardly at all, if ever. But letter B of ambidextrous conducting. When practicing with the left hand, just remember that your pattern is exactly the opposite to that of the right hand. So the left hand pattern is a mirror image. If you're left-handed, I'm sorry, you have to reverse all of these hands that I'm talking about. But it's a mirror image, they're mirror image of each other. But when you're doing two hands, here's the thing you want to remember. You don't want to cross your hands in the middle. You want to keep them separate. So you've got to be wide enough that if you're big, you're not going to come in and accidentally do the crossover, right? Next thing you'll know, you'll be an Auntie Anne's pretzel, and people will be putting salt and dipping you in nacho cheese. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to cross hands. So make sure that you stay wide enough. I will say this, that it's encouraged that this conducting style not be overused. Far too many conductors use both hands in a mirror image, and I like it in congregational. Sometimes I'll do it, sometimes I won't. But they don't realize that there's a potential to use the offhand for much greater things than just mirroring the right hand. So if you're learning conducting, like, what do I do with my non-dominant hand? For me, it's my right hand. For you, it might be your left hand. When I'm not conducting, where do I put it? Really, you can let it dangle by your side, nice and relaxed. Some people will just hold it in front of their torso. But the last thing you want to do is just leave it out here, because that's an attention signal, like, hey, pay attention, right? But if it's just always there, then when you go to use that signal, it's the boy who cried wolf. Like, well, am I paying attention, or is he just holding his hand out there? So usually that's the clue. Like, if I'm going along and I bring up my other hand, then it's usually the man in choir. All right, get ready, because we're about to come in, and I'll look at them, and then we'll bring them in together. So that's just a little bit about ambidextrous conducting. Turn the page, and we'll talk about cues. And this is where using your non-dominant hand is so, so powerful. What is a cue? You've heard this phrase. We use it in everyday life. It's amazing to me how many music terms we use in everyday life. Like, he pulled out all the stops. That's a reference to the organ. Swell or crescendo, we use those, right? It came to a great crescendo. That's a musical term. But a cue, he came in on cue, right? That's a musical term, right? So what's the idea? That a cue is designed to assist performers in making a precise, confident entrance. A cue should be given. I will say this, and you can testify to this. Not everybody in my choir, I'm on the internet, so I have to be careful, is a great musician. So it's not going to necessarily going to sound the greatest, though we work on some of those things, right? I'm not a great singer, but I try and sing for the glory of the Lord. But the thing that I can get my choir to do is I can get them to be unified. They can come in on time and they can stop. You don't have to be a great musician to come in on time, to stop on time, right? And to follow some of those cues. It's not necessarily maybe going to sound, we're not Metropolitan Tabernacle. It's not going to sound like that. It's not going to sound like we have paid musicians, but we can at least be together. And I think there's value in being together. There's power in being able to sing praises to the Lord together succinctly at the same time. And so cues help do that. When would you use a cue? If you're in a choir setting and somebody is coming in this Christmas program, we're going to have solos, right? And so I may start the piano and then I'll turn to the soloist and then I'll bring them in. Now, hopefully they know when to come in on their own. But if they're not paying attention or they're nervous, then I will specifically nod to them, look at them, catch their attention, and then I will bring them in. And I'm going to bring them in the same way that I would bring my pianist in. I'm going to use my other hand and I'm going to give a preparatory gesture in time. And then I'm going to bring them in. And I'm going to bring them in a welcoming way too. It's not going to be like a, right? Okay. You can do that. That's what your pastor wants. You can do that. You can get all fancy with it, shoot from the hip, but you're bringing people in, okay? Another way that you might bring them in would be sectional entrances, which is, okay, here come the ladies are going to sing the first part, and then here come the men, right? Or the men are singing, all right, here come the altos, right? You're bringing them in mid phrase or whatever it happens to be, or the next verse. You're bringing in sections, sopranos, altos, tenors, or basses, or whatever it happens to be. The violins, you're bringing in the brass, or whatever the ensemble you're working with. For entrances that follow long rests, a lot of times between the end of the first verse and chorus, in a choral piece, we'll have a long kind of pause, right? The piano does something beautiful, and then we got to bring them back in. Well, that's not a start anymore. That's everybody comes back in. Now you should be beating through all of that because the music's still going, and then you've got to bring them in, and I would bring them in with my hand, my other hand. Really, for the beginning of any important musical event, in any situation where it would help the performers with a difficult entrance. There are other times when I do cues. Let's see if we can find an example of this. Let's see. That's not a good one. I wouldn't cue on that. How about, I'm not going to find one now. As soon as I move off this topic, I'm going to find one. Actually, look at 471. 471. This is it the crowning day? Is it the crowning day? At the end of the verse, do you see where it says, if Jesus should come today? Well, on the word day, the four parts are A flat, C, and A flat for the first half of that measure. But do you notice how the altos move and is move? And so what I might do is I may hold out day, and then I'll cue them when their move happens. Not that I'm bringing them in, but I'm telling them, okay, I've counted for you. Day, 2, 3, and then they would move. So the basses would go day, 2, 3, A, 2, 3. They would move on my cue. And so that would be another time when I might cue my grouper. Usually it's my tenors because they do a lot of suspensions and then they move down, and my altos do sometimes as well. What is the procedure for cues? What is the procedure for cues? Look, it's not complicated. And I don't want anybody to get caught up in the technical, my hand wasn't in the right shape. You're just trying to communicate. And at first you're doing your dead level best. I got to throw this out there and hopefully I do it on time. Right. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. The very first thing is you got to make good eye contact. If I'm trying to bring Brother Stan in and we're going along and then I'm like, he doesn't know I'm talking to him yet. I can't talk to him. Brother Stan. Right? Right? Although we've all done that sometimes. Usually it's the men. Let's be honest. They're over there talking about the Bengals game or whatever. Come on, guys. And you're trying to bring them in, but I have to. If I'm trying to bring in Brother Stan, I'm gonna try and catch him way before it needs to happen. Like, hey, heads up, here we come, and then that's when he comes in with his part or whatever it happens to be. It's all about making that eye contact. And then of course we understand that that preparatory gesture, that's going to help him know, okay, you breathe, and then he's going to feel that downbeat, just as if you were bringing an entire group in to start something. Um, and again, that same preparatory gesture is going to communicate that dynamic level, that volume level, or the speed, or the articulation style. If I want my strings to come in with a very then when I cue them in, I might bring them in with a right, a very, and I'm going to try and communicate that. And even now, that's hard for my right hand to do. I can do it with my left hand all day long, but it feels kind of awkward for my right hand. Your facial expression has to be positive and supportive, not full of angst and anguish. And I can't believe how bad this is going. Try not to communicate that in the middle of your performance. Many well-intentioned entrances have been undermined by inappropriate facial movements and grimaces by the conductor. You're like, oh, I hear that. You come in now and hopefully make it better. So make sure you're engaged, right? We're always communicating with your face, with your eyebrows, with how you breathe, with how you stand, with your arms, with your shoulders. Even sometimes if I'm really trying to get a lot of energy, I'll bounce up and down, right? I'm trying to get that as tall as I could possibly be, my poor 5'8", 7.5 self. I'm going to try and get as big as I can, and sometimes I'll stand on my tippy toes to try and do that. The general and reassuring to the performers. If you're trying to get someone to come in on time, it's just any form of leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership, Dr. Lee Robertson used to say. If they don't come in on time, then it's my fault because I didn't cue them, right? I must not expect them to know more about the music than I, as a director, as a leader. I don't want that. So you say I'm not a musician. Study. If God's placed you in the place where you end up leading a choir or starting a choir, or in a place where um, you're willing, then He will help you and He will equip you. And you can get help, and there are resources online. But sometimes just practicing some of these things. Reminders for cueing. This is interesting. May be penciled in the score to provide consistency in rehearsals and performance. If you look at that example that I gave you, God and God alone. Where might I have my first cue? Where am I concerned about them coming in? In the first word, right? And so what I might do is, since I managed to lose my pen, can I borrow your pen for a second? Thank you. What I might do is I might take my score and I just might write in all caps so that I can see it, Q, right? And then if it's a specific section, I might write Q S, Q the sopranos, Q A, Q altos, or Q T, right? Or Q John, right? And then I might do that. Now, after a while, you don't have to do that anymore. Sometimes it's helpful. I make notes in my music all the time. The musician's best friend is a pencil, not a pen, but it's a pencil, so that you can make marks and you can erase marks, and then you can come back. Because by the time you get back to choir practice the next week, how many times do you remember or forget? And what were we doing here? Right. And sometimes you make these changes on the fly when you're working with the pianist. So you write maybe cue on there. If you look ahead, the next place that I'm going to need to cue someone is measure 14. We're going to go over this in a second, measure 14. Then I have a little bit of an awkward cue in measure 17. The reason I would say this is an awkward cue is because it's not on a main beat. One of the reasons I know that this is not on a main beat is because at the very beginning, I made note that my time signature was 4/4. My time signature was 4/4. And so I'm expecting to find in 4/4 something like 4 of these. And now sometimes those get turned into eighth notes. But there's a section in measure 17 that uses this right here. And the fact that I had a single eighth note kind of hanging out by itself tells me that that's landing between my main divisions of my quarter now. And so now I've really got to work to bring them in because they're not going to come in on a, this is my main divisions of my quarter note. You feel it? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. And now I got to bring them in here. Well, that's not in my beat pattern. How am I going to do that? I'm going to get my hand ready and I'm going to like interject. It's almost like this was flying by and I'm trying to shoot the gap, right? That's what I'm feeling, right? I'm trying to bring them in. So that can be a little bit awkward. But in the very next measure after that, look at measure 18. Guess who I have to bring in again? In a non-standard time, this comes in on beat 2. So the men come in, 1, 2, and all the best and worst of men. So what I do in my mind is I associate their cue with whatever word I'm singing in my head. So I can see it. When I am about to say the word worst, then that's when I need to get them in there, right? 1, 2, 3, and the best and worst. And I miss it because I'm trying to talk and do all this stuff. 1, 2, 3, and all the and worst. And then I'm going to come up on best so that I can bring them best and worst of men. But I'd long since hit them and try to get their attention. Sorry, the ladies are over here in my corner. I'll look at them over there. And then I have to do it again in measure 19. And then in measure 20, I have to do it again. So this one has a little bit of intense practice for me to get the cueing right. And then if you get good at cueing and directing, you can actually you can give your choir confidence and you can kind of shorten the amount of time it takes to learn songs because you don't need them to necessarily be able to count on their own. You just need them to, hey, follow me. Got this. Follow me. And it gives them confidence too, right? I'm going to come in on the same time because I hear it all the time. I don't know how to count. Watch me. You don't have to count. Watch me. Some of them, I don't want you to count because I know you can't count. Watch me, right? Listen to Mara. Watch me. It'll be okay. Don't count on your own. You can cue and you pencil them in the score. How can you give a cue? I'm a right-handed cuer. That sounds weird, although I play pool with all my other fans, so I'm a left-handed pool cuer. But I'm a right-handed cuer bringer in with my choir. And I'm going to turn and I'm going to look at them and I'm going to make sure we make that eye contact. And then I'm going to make my pattern size smaller. This is important. So if I'm coming in and then I'm about to bring in my cue, I'm going to make that smaller, not because I want them to get softer, but because I need them to see that this is about to happen. Does that make sense? If I'm over here doing this, they're not going to see this in here. So I'm going to bring this down. And then I'm just trying to be as visually clear because it's all about communication, visually clear. This is interesting. Number 4, raise the plane of the cueing movements. Cue higher than your normal beat. So here's what that means. Let's say your beat is here, right? Let's give it a nominal, 4 feet off the ground, whatever. And this is my plane. This is where I'm trying to keep my beat. This is my horizontal plane. There we go. And I'm trying to keep it this way. I'm going to cue higher than that so that I'm not down here because I want them to see a difference, right? You've got to see a difference between where the regular beat is and where the cue is. So those are just things to make it visually clear. You could cue with your left hand. If you have a choir if you have a pianist that can keep your beat and they're doing a great job, then you can literally stop and they're just going to come in and then you get the whole choir's attention and you bring them in. You bring them in with both hands. You can bring them in with one hand. You can bring them with the right hand. You can bring them in. Let's say I'm going along and I'm doing 2 hands. I want Brother Stan to come in. My hands are over here. Brother Stan to come in. And I bring him in with my head, right? It's all about catching his attention and keeping that. And I'm going to still do that same preparatory, right? Up with the chin, down. So you can cue with the nod of the head, lifting the head slightly as a preparatory gesture and lowering it for the entrance. All right. So that's cueing. It's very helpful, especially as your choir music gets a little bit more complex. And you're like, all right, man, you got to come in on time. And they're like, I don't know when to come in. Well, you can sing it with them. But sometimes you get so focused on singing the men's part, you lose the ladies' part and all that stuff. Let's talk about dynamics. Dynamics are the heartbeat of music. Dynamics are the rise and fall the change of volume. We speak dynamically, right? Um, any of you have that teacher in school who's he just spoke monotone? Today, class, we're going to discuss Pythagorean's theorem, turning the textbooks to 1437, because all those classes always had the biggest textbooks, and you thought you were never going to get done with them. But we don't speak that way, right? We speak with highs and we speak with lows. And sometimes if you're trying to get a person's attention, you might raise your voice, like, hey, listen up. Or a preacher might raise his voice, but sometimes the preacher's getting really serious. They might get really close to you, and they'll talk in hushed tones. And that's when you know you've really got to listen. But we talk that way. Well, why is music any different, right? But that's dynamics. That's the dynamic. That word dynamic is that same root word dynamite. It's explosive, right? And we expect that to happen. So how do we communicate dynamics? You know this inherently. You know this. If I want you to sing soft, then I'm going to use pretty much from my wrist down, and this is the quietest I'm going to get you to sing. Right? And that's kind of that whisper. I'm communicating to you small, right? And then if I need you to increase that, we might sing la. Let's just sing la together. La. Here we go. All right. And we're just going to sing it at this beat. La, 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 la. And without any explanation, I just want you to sing with me. All right. Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, ready, go. La 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 la. You see the visual changes, right? So that's dynamics. It's that ability to increase tempo or increase volume. How do you do that? You vary the size of your pattern. Well, what's my pattern? Whatever it happens to be for that song. If I'm beating in and 3, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now, I'm going to lead. If I'm singing congregationally, I'm going to lead that out vocally as well. And I'm going to try and get them to do that. But if I wasn't singing, I actually sing with my choir. I'm sure I show up in the microphone, but that's okay. We have a good time anyways. I'm going to sing that out and get them, but I'm also going to get them to come along with me and come bigger. The other thing I may do is this is the universal gesture of give me some more, right? Come on now, give me some more. And then sometimes if I want to really increase that volume, like if I've got them holding a pitch, la, sing that pitch with me, la, right? It's that air capacity, right? The more air I add, the louder that pitch is going to get, and then it's going to come back down. Sometimes you can hear it this way, right? And so sometimes you can do that. Some conductors will visually do it this way, like they're raising the volume slider on whatever, some audio device, and they may la, right? Or what's the opposite of that? La, right? And you pull it down. But you can increase the size of the pattern. As the size of the pattern is increased, the performer's volume output will grow. As the motion is increased in the elbow, it should be decreased in the wrist. And so you can practice that. There are some visually pleasing ways to increase, right? The more you get your elbow involved, the more locked this joint is going to be right here so that you don't get that floppy, right? Whatever happens down here, if it's driven from up here, this becomes like a whip. So you may be moving a certain speed down here, but this is that whip-like reaction at the end of it. So you want to make sure you keep that kind of locked. So if I'm back here at my elbow, if I start to get my shoulders, now I'm going to start to lock this, and now I'm going to get even bigger, right? And then the smaller I get, I work my way back to my forearm, and I start to lead from here. And then if I want to get really small, I might lead just from my fingertips or from my wrist. So you're just communicating via size. As the motion of the shoulder is increased, the motion of the elbow should decrease. As the motion of the shoulder goes away, the elbow kind of picks up more, and then you work your way, and you can feel that transfer of sound. So those are the various dynamics. Let's talk about dynamics for just a second. What do they look like in music? Like, how do you know as you're looking at a piece of music, how loud or how soft to sing. Okay. We have all seen things like this: MF, MP, F, FF, P, double P. Okay, and so this is kind of maybe the midline right here. And then from there, you'll feel this rose, right? And then from here, you'll feel that we're going to keep getting softer, right? And we could take that along if we were to put that as one solid visualization. We'd have the softest possible up to the loudest possible. All right. So the M stands for the word mezzo. It's Italian for moderate, medium, right? And then the F actually stands for the word forte, which means loud. The P stands for the word piano, which in Italian actually means soft. The original piano, as we know it today in the late 1700s, was known as the piano et forte, which is the instrument that had the ability to play soft and loud. And so that's kind of where we get our things from. So we've got medium loud, medium soft. By the way, there should be a difference between these two, right? And one of the reasons we don't have a big difference between these two is because our floor and our ceiling are too close to each other in our instruments. And so people don't play loud enough. Actually, what really happens is they don't play soft enough. And so now if I cram everything into this area, then there's not a lot of difference between all the stuff in the middle. But if I give this big of an area and soft is way down here and loud is way up here, then I can start to separate the degrees of intensity of each of these things in greater percentages. So this is called mezzo piano. This is called piano. And this is my favorite aspect of music. I don't know why, but this is called pianissimo. So it's piano with an isimo on the end of it. And so this is the same thing. This is loud with an isimo on it. So it's fortissimo. But my favorite thing is that you can actually, on piano, this is hard to do. It depends on the size piano you own. You can actually go to triple P, which they never told me the name for this. So I made up my own. I said it's piano isimo, right? Because that's way more fun to say than just triple piano. And fortissimo. That's my logic. If you get one as piano and two as isimo, pianissimo, then the third one must be isimo, right? I'm going with it. So I'll patent it and trademark it, and we'll make some t-shirts. That's the dynamics. And so the change for dynamics, you have static dynamics, right, in a piece, and you may see, okay, we're all going to start out medium soft. And so how long do you stay medium soft? Until it tells you something else, right? It's kind of, tempo is kind of like that too. It's an ongoing perpetual change until it's kind of like the Roomba, right? The robot vacuums, it's going to go whatever direction it's going until it hits something to change its direction. So I'm going to continue mezzo piano until something else comes along, and that may be this, or it may be this. But if you look at your graphic there, you see crescendos and diminuendos. What is a crescendo? A crescendo is an increase inside your current dynamic family. It's an increase. You may increase to something else. Typically, if you're going to see a crescendo, there needs to be some kind of a stopping point at the end of it so that you just don't keep enlarging. And the opposite of crescendo is what they call a decrescendo. I call it a diminuendo. I think most people do. And you can see right there, crescendo is abbreviated CRESC in the music. And so there's symbols for some of these. I'm trying to think if God and God Alone has any crescendo symbols in it. It does not have the abbreviation, but if you look at measure 21, you'll notice above the sopranos in measure 21, you'll see that this symbol. And so as I'm leading, it's God's and God's alone, right? And so I'm coming into this, whatever this note is, I don't know what it is. I was close. All right, here we go. And I was going to sing that note, and I needed them to get bigger. I'm going to start. It's God's and God's alone. And I may bring up my other hand to try and communicate to them, hey, watch, something's going to happen. Or I may literally stop beating gods and gods alone. Right? Do you feel that? That swelling. Or maybe if I am beating, I make gods and gods alone. Right? And I'll keep giving that, not to come hither, but keep getting bigger. That's the gesture I'm thinking of. That's what I'm trying to communicate. And then how big do I want them to get? In measure 22, we're getting bigger until we reach this volume, forte. And that's what you see throughout this piece. You see at the very beginning. How loud does the piano start at the very beginning? Of God and God alone. How loud does the piano start? MP, medium soft, mezzo piano. Or sometimes you'll hear people call it quiet, medium quiet. Okay. So what does that mean for me as a visual communicator? All right, piano's going to start big, right? But this, she's going to play like a music box, right? She's going to, and it's probably not going to sound because I communicated that way too soft. But if I just want something kind of medium, then I might look over at her and give her something not my biggest, not my smallest, right? Somewhere in the middle towards the small side. I'm going to err on that side. And that's going to keep going. And the choir's going to come in at the same volume in measure 6. And you could keep on going on. And as a choir director, until you get used to noticing those things, you can develop some kind of like color coordinated system, right? Okay, all my softs are going to be blue. All my louds are going to be orange, right? Pick a color that actually makes you think of loud, whatever happens to be. Or maybe just all your dynamics are yellow, right? And you mark them up. The director's copy should be fairly marked up as you work through some of these things. And so you can see that crescendo, that getting louder. Do we have any diminuendos in this piece? Any getting softers? I don't see one. There's probably one after the pages that I didn't put in here. Yeah, I don't see any of those. And so that's kind of your communication via dynamics. And so at the bottom of that final page before the example, you can see that kind of a picture. This is a good way to practice. So let's say you're beating along, and this is, oh, by the way, if you see this at the beginning of a song in your time signature place, that stands for common time. And the most common time signature in all of music is 4/4. So if you see that, that's what that means. Common time means 4/4. If you see it that looks like a cent sign, that means cut time, which is just the shorthand way of saying 2/2. And then file this away somewhere that ever comes across. Something that is written in cut time is twice as fast as it looks. Okay? That's just a general rule. If you see something in cut time, it's twice as fast as it looks. The reason they write it the way that they do is because it's easier to say, hey, read these values and then use this to say, but go twice as fast, rather than write the values twice as fast. Because, like, let's say I wrote 4 quarter notes and I told you that that speed was 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. But I really wanted you to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I wanted you to go that fast. Well, yeah, I could communicate that and I could turn all of these into eighth notes. The problem with that is if I start with my note being an eighth note, whatever, and I need to split that in half or whatever, because I got 2 syllables, now I'm like, okay, here's the cut time in the simplest explanation I give it to you. Would you rather do math in whole numbers or fractions? Okay. But what if I said we're going to do it in the whole numbers? but what we're really doing is everything is 100 times smaller than that. Like do the problem as if it's a whole number and then move the decimal. That's all we're saying. This allows you to think in easier values with the reminder, go twice as fast. So you'll see some songs like that. You're like, it doesn't look that fast. Well, that's the musician's shorthand. So when you look down here, you see this common time in this example. And this is a really good practice. I would stand in front of a mirror and I would beat each beat of your pattern and try and get the first one small. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so I'm going to be my biggest on the sixth note. Do you see it right there of this example? I'm going to be the biggest on my sixth note because it's fortissimo. And so I'm going to start and beat one, small, a little bit bigger, medium, big, biggest, back to, down, 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 down. And you can just use this example, just practice getting fluidly bigger, right? The last thing you want to do when you're changing tempos is communicate this kind of 8-bit version of where you're stair stepping things, right? We instead want this arc, right? Instead of this, okay, this one's this size, and then this one's this size, and then this one's this size, and then this one's this size, right? But we want it to be fluid, curved in our process. So that's the exercise there. Let's have choir practice for just a second. I'm just going to go through this, and if you have questions, then ask them. But I'm just going to tell you some of the things that's happening on this page. Some of you have maybe wondered, some of you will know the answers to this. Why is all this stuff on the page? What is going on here? So we're just going to talk through this God and God alone example for just a minute. Actually, what time is it? Yep, let's just do this. Anybody need a break? Okay, good. Using people, you can take your own break. All right, so you've got a title. All right. If you were to look in your hymn book, you have whatever hymn you have open. I don't know. There are 2 names at the top underneath the title. Do you see them? This is how I remember it. The lyricist is on the left because they both start with L. The lyricist is on the left. So if you're like, who wrote the words to this? I'm looking at 540. John White wrote the words to this. Who wrote the music to that? That's the guy on the right. So that's just kind of how they lay that out. The lyricist is on the left. The composer, that's what they call the music writer. The composer is on the right. In the choral music, though, they don't do it that way. They put everything on the right, but they'll delineate by saying words and music by, in this particular example, Phil McHugh. And then underneath that, arranged. What does it mean to arrange something? That means that Russell Maldin is an excellent orchestrator. I enjoy his choral arrangements. He took this song by Phil McHugh, who did not write it for choir, but who probably just sung it as a solo. And he took it and he expanded it to have voice parts. That's all he did. He arranged it. He didn't write the song. It's not his song. That's all that means. And then we see some things here at the very beginning. What are these boxes with the number 1 and the number 2? You see them right there at the very beginning, and there's one in measure 4. Anybody know what those are? Those are soundtrack markings. So if you didn't have a choir, a pianist, and you had a CD and you were trying to rehearse with it, we can't fast forward your way through, right? And this is a CD, so we're going to date ourselves. You couldn't just the slider bar over a little bit. So it doesn't work that way, right? These were CD tracks, and if you wanted to start at the introduction, then you would put track 1. If you wanted to start in measure 4, you put track 2, and you'll see that throughout the song, track 3, track 4. And so sometimes, though, you can use that to communicate with people. We were doing some choir song the other day that didn't have measure numbers at the beginning of each line. It was driving me nuts because I was trying to tell the choir where we're at. And if you're trying to tell a group of 32 people where you're at, you kind of need they need to know these landmarks, right? And it didn't have them. I was like, CD mark, whatever. And I started to use it. And they're like, what's a CD mark? I said, it looks like a CD case. It's got a circle and a big number in it. And then they started finding it. And the younger people helped some of the older people know what a CD was. Nowadays, you can't even buy CDs anymore. You know, Best Buy is removing their CD section. Like you can't buy them anymore. And man, the tapes went away. You can't get cassettes either. The other day, my kids were watching something, Lion King, I think, in the VHS, and it got stuck. And so I had to do my magic to get it out, right? And they're like, "Can we still use it?" I was like, "No, it is. It's now 12 feet long, and you cannot use it." And I like holding up a pencil to people and be like, "Do you know what this is?" They're like, "A pencil." I was like, "No, it's a cassette tape rewinder." That's exactly what it is. So that's the CD mark. But right there, right above the very first measure in almost all chord arrangements, they will put a tempo marking, how fast you're going to go. Now, they'll usually put a descriptor, and then sometimes they'll put what we call metronome marking. So the metronome marking on God and God Alone is this equals 65. Well, what does that mean? Well, because we're in 4/4, we're counting quarter notes. We've got 4 quarter notes per measure. And you can visualize that by drawing a little quarter note underneath your 4, if that helps you. And so what we're saying is that if I was to set a clicker at 65, and sometimes you'll hear people say this, BPM, beats per minute, a clock is 60 beats per minute, right? That's all we're doing. If you're taking a heart rate or pulse, right, you're counting those. So 65 beats per minute. So I'm close to, so here's 60. And we could start there and be okay, right? So what they're telling me is that 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. And you can get an app if you're like, I don't know how fast this is. The Pro Metronome app, I love it. I used it just today with one of my students, and I can ramp up my number. I can change my time signature if I need to. But I could set this at 65. And sometimes I will do this. Now my Bluetooth is on. Go away, Bluetooth. I can't use technology. And if you're listening to the clock, this will bug you because they're not together. Every now and then they're together. But that's what that means. That's that metronome marking. And sometimes it'll have it. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes they'll just say, with gusto. Well, what does that mean? More quickly, right? And you can kind of get a feel for it. What else do we see? Where does the choir come in? And usually that helps, right? Usually that helps. And the choir is supposed to be reverent. But that they use the double bar lines right there to signify this is the end of the piano part, and now we've got the intro part. You also notice that at the very end, at the left margin, you'll have these braces, right? This one kind of looks like a mustache. And so this is a vocal brace. And so if you see that, or sorry, this is a piano brace. If you see that, you'll know, oh, those are piano music. That's hands together. And then the vocal brace is a little bit more square. And so you're like, oh, where's the vocal line? Usually it's the one that has words, but you can't tell that until you get over here. And so this is piano music. But do you see how there's one skinny line connecting them all together? That means that all of this is together, which is why the measure number. What is a measure number? What is a measure? Talked about this a while back, but that measure is simply that division using the vertical lines to divide it into measures. So how many measures on the first line? 3. And then they start the next line with the next one sequentially. So measure 4. So you got to teach your choir that though, right? Like when you can't just walk into choir practice, and I just had a bunch of junior hires promote up to the choir and be like, all right, measure 17. And they're like, now after a while they catch on, but times you just throw that in there, and you don't have to take like a whole training time to be like, all right, class, this is a measure number. You just throw it out there as you're going along. All right, we're at measure 7, where it starts. We're going to start on the word loan, and that's another clue to them, right? Okay, I'm looking for the word loan. That measure numbers at the top left corner at the beginning of each line, and then you just count measure 7 and the measure 8, and you can just kind of work your way through that. And they'll catch on. Even my dad, who like claims to know nothing about music, he's caught on. He knows what the measure numbers are. And so those are some of the things you see at the first page. Is this an SATB piece? Like, who sings this piece? Is this for a whole choir? Is this for just parts? How do we know? It is a whole choir. It does not say this. This is actually out of a book, which would have said that at the very beginning. Who sings in measure 6? The whole choir, right? But where's the alto part? They're together. You say, how do we know that? Because it said choir, right? But you have to explain that to new people. They're like, I don't know where my part is. And the men are unison. They're all singing the same part, and the ladies are singing the same part. Actually, in this particular line, they're actually singing the legitimate same melody line. So you turn the page as you work your way along. As I'm looking at this from a choral perspective, where does this first verse end? Measure 13. Now there's a visual clue, right? There's that, not every piece does that double bar line. And so you can say, hey, we're going to go, you might say, okay, to the piano player, all right, let's run through this first verse. And they'll kind of know it. They'll feel it when it gets to the end. But you may be like, all right, we're going to stop at measure 13. Well, how do I know where the end of the verse is? I saw it. I see that. And measure 14, I know, is the beginning of the next verse. But if you don't know that off the top of your head, you just go through and it's called score study. You get your piece of music. You're like, oh man, I don't think I could ever teach this to them. And you just start marking things. And even if you don't give it the exact name, it's okay. It's about communication, getting everybody on the same page. For example, and I've said this earlier, in measure 9, we're at the top of page 4 at measure 9. Do you see the word own? And right after that, we get this squiggly thing. Well, the technical definition of that is a quarter rest. Well, you know what I tell my choir? Full of 13 to 80. I say, that's Mr. Squiggles, because he looks all squiggly. And they laugh, and in the back of their mind, they will never forget that that's Mr. Squiggles. And Mr. Squiggles goes, and they think that's ridiculous. But sometimes if you talk to them like they're 4, not in a talking down to them, but what I'm saying is you don't give them the technical definition for things. That's not going to stick. Give them something that, hey, you're looking for that squiggly mark that looks like a Z stacked on top of a C. Oh, I can find that. If you just say to poor Miss Campbell, hey, find the quarter rest. What? Right? But if you describe it more visually, you got to find those things. Hey, find that rest in measure 9. You see that rest in measure 9 that looks like a 7 where you held the pen down a little bit too much when you're making the dot? That's an 8th rest. And that's a quicker, that's the Mr. Squiggles' little cousin. We're gonna stop our sound there. And sometimes I don't need them to understand the value of an 8th rest. Don't see, when you see that, cut off all sound, right? And I need them to do that. And that helps us kind of be on the same page. From the mighty to the small, the of them all. And in practice, I might not beat. I might not do the whole thing. I might just say, sing this with me. From the mighty to the small. And then I will like give them that. I might not do that in rehearsal or in actual performance, but I'm conditioning them to recognize that's an 8. We're going to stop the sound right there. They're not going to describe it. They're not going to define it. They're not going to write music. They're not going to become world famous composers, but they're going to know, don't sing when you see Mr. Squiggles or when you see the 8th rest. And so we're just looking through the music and seeing some things. As I look through this music, and I try and look at it from a perspective of where's my choir going to struggle? My choir is going to struggle in measure 17. Why? Because it's in the middle of a verse, and men get conditioned to, if the ladies are singing it, they're going to sing all of the first part, and then I don't have to come in. So you got to train them. Okay, guys, pay attention. The ladies are going to sing, reveals the truth of all we call unknown. And then, guys, you got to be ready in measure 17. And so I will tell them during rehearsal, hey, watch out for measure 17. Make sure you're ready. And the ladies will start singing, God. And I'll be like, guys, get ready. God alone reveals the truth of all we call unknown. And then I'll visually, and I'm trying to know that before I even get to rehearsal. What am I looking at? Do I know where I'm looking at? Where else am I going to struggle? Where's my choir going to struggle? Measure 18. Why? Because the ladies have to sing a harmony, not the altos, the sopranos. And sopranos, I love my sopranos. And I'm just as a blunt truth, Sopranos are sopranos because they don't have a natural ear for singing harmony. They just latch onto the melody, and that's great. We need melody singers. But there are times in choral music when they don't get to sing the tune that they think they're going to sing, and it's a big struggle for them. It's not that it can't be done, and we encourage them along the way. But as a teacher of music, as a choral conductor, I have to know, okay, if my sopranos do not have the main lead, then we're going to have to spend extra time on that. Otherwise, now I'm not going to have to spend that much time with the altos. They are used to doing this kind of backup extra stuff, right? The tenors are a little bit used to that, but I know, okay, I'm going to have to spend that, and I'm going to have to. So here, I'll just give you, this is a sample. This is how I did this with my choir. I had the pianist play, actually, sing that with me. All you guys, you're my choir right now. Sing that with me. Ooh, sing it again. Ooh, sing it again. Ooh. All right, Miss Mary's going to play the piano part, and you come in when I bring you in. Ooh, there we go. Here we go. Do it again. Ooh, right. I can't play and point at the same time. That's why I have a piano player. Here we go. One more time. I'm actually going to back up. And then we'd have everybody go through, and I would just make them sing it and sing it and sing it. And sometimes I make them sing it, ooh, and I'll say, vocalize that note with me, and everybody will sing, ooh, sing it with me. Ooh, don't move. All right, here's your next note. Ooh, ooh, go back with me. Ooh. Now we're gonna have the third note. Ooh, ooh. And I'm just different ways that I can get this to stick, to stick, to stick. I'm not asking them to count this. I'm not asking them to pick it out of thin air. We're just working it. We're working it. It's like kneading dough. You're just working it. And then here's the great thing. When I get to measure 19, I'll tell them, hey, sopranos and ladies, this is the same thing, but instead of ooh, you're just a pitch down. Ooh. And by doing my due diligence in measure 18, I've effectively taught measure 19 already, just with lowering the pitch, right? And by associating that, you say, how do you learn to do it? You just got to study your score, and you got to go through some of those things, and then measure rehearsal 4, or sorry, 20. We have a little bit different. It's God's and God's alone, and so I told him, you're going to echo. Listen for the men to sing, change the master's plan. It's God's, it's God's. And the very first thing I have them do is not worry about pitch. I want you guys to sing, it's God's, it's God's. Say that with me. It's God's. Here we go. Change the master's plan. It's God's. All I'm trying to get you to do is time that, right? I don't need you to understand what the timing is. I need you to feel it, right? Sometimes tricky timing is better felt than explained, right? It's caught rather than taught. So if I was to do that again, change the master's plan. It's God's. Okay, I'm not going to lead you. Let's see what happens. Change the master's plan. It's God's, right? You felt that, right? Because you were just, and so that's, I know that that's going to be a struggle with my choir. And so I'm going to hit that. I'm actually probably going to hit that in the very first rehearsal. You say, well, wouldn't you start at the beginning? Not necessarily. I start at the hard part, because over the course of time, I need that hard part to not be hard by the time we get to it. And if the hard part's at the end and I've waited till the third week of rehearsal to hit it, I don't have enough time. Does that make sense? And so you're studying your score and you're planning and you're working through this. This is actually I lied to you earlier. It is an SATB song. I did not lie to you. But for most of this song, it is an SA baritone, soprano, alto, baritone, because the men don't actually split into parts until measure 24. That's where the men actually split into parts. Say, how do I know that? On what word in measure 24 do my sopranos and alto, or excuse me, do my basses and tenors get individual notes? And you see it. You say, I don't know that, because that syllable has 2 notes underneath it for the 2 men's parts. Up until that point, I guess that's not true. Lone had it as well as soon as they turned the page. Now, that's something that I would have to tell my choir, because up to this point, what are the men going to think? We just all sing the same part. And then they're going to get to measure 23. But I need to know this. I need to say, hey, guys, at the bottom of page 5, just heads up, you're going to turn the page and you're going to split. And so if I can warn them ahead of time, what are the chances are that they're going to be successful? A lot better than if we have a train wreck. But how can I warn them ahead of time? Because I study my music. So that's kind of the fundamentals of conducting. And a lot of this just comes from doing it and experience. And you try and you fail and you try and you fail. And oh, they didn't come in. I guess I didn't cue them right. We'll try something different. Well, what's the technically correct way? Do the functional way, right? There's technically correct ways to do lots of things, but then there's also practical, like, okay, how am I going to communicate this? What do I do if I want it to be soft? I want it to be big. I've got to be big. If I want you to come in, I got to get your attention, right? It's just a lot of common sense thing, but I think sometimes we make so much more about got to be, you know, follow exactly. Look, we're not here to be, we're not going to Carnegie Hall. I've actually been to Carnegie Hall, the one in West Virginia. Do you know there's two? One in West Virginia, built by the Carnegie family. We sang there as a college choir, and we had a guy lock his knees, fell over in the middle of the Messiah. And so I was standing there, and I don't remember who it was, Joel or somebody like that. And next thing I know, he was falling towards me and another guy, and we grabbed him by the armpits and we just drug him out the side door and sat him on the stairs and came back in singing. And the choir director's like, so fortunately it wasn't a timber, he didn't take out the whole row. So that was my experience at Carnegie. You might have to, but honestly, that's a real, especially when people get nervous, they do lock their knees, right? And if you're ever in a situation, it's one thing in the choir loft. It's another thing if you're ever like have a group, a high school choir or whatever, and they travel somewhere and they're on risers, right? And they're like bleachers, right? And if you fall over, that little railing's not stopping you. You fold like a pretzel and fall through it. So it really is important to remind them, don't lock your knees, right? Don't lock your knees. So next thing you know, you'll be picking them off the ground and you'll be like, what happened? Why am I here? So it's exciting. So that's what I have. That's it. Any questions? Preacher, welcome back. So that's it. Yes. Yep. So just this last Sunday, not last Sunday, 2 Sundays ago, I had this vision of this piece that I wanted to sing. I went out of town, and while I was out of town, I wanted Pastor to introduce it. But Pastor ended up the week I was gone spending a lot more time on the piece that we were trying to do that. That's perfectly fine. That's what needed to be done. But because of that, I lost that introduction time for that piece. And so when we started to get into it, and I have to be careful because when I look at a piece, this is my life. This is what I'm trained to do. And when I look at a piece, I'm like, yeah, we can do that. I was a little optimistic, right? They were not so optimistic. And so we ran through it and they're like, we knew immediately this was not going to happen by the Christmas program. And so we shelved it. But there was another piece where I had to make this decision like, okay, the men are not getting this part. Ladies, sing the melody with them, right? And you kind of pull them over to sing it. Or we had a piece where we were getting the oohs, but we were not getting the ahs. And I just said, all right, we're not awing, right? Just no ahs. And I'm sure you've done that. Cut out the ahs or cut out the oohs, right? If it's not happening. Sometimes you don't need them. Sometimes the composers or the arrangers trying to be cute, and not in a bad way. They're just trying to be artistic, right? They're trying to make this interesting. And sometimes it's just wherever your choir's at, you're just like, okay, we're not gonna do that part. In one of the songs, I cut out, they do this at the end. They think everybody has like operatic sopranos. And then the chord arrangement goes super high at the end. And, I value the glass in our building, and we do not need to sing that high. And very rarely do you really even have the sopranos that can sing that high comfortably and on pitch. And so I just said, all right, we're going to cut here. And I just told the piano player what to do. Okay, just jump to this chord and we're going to call it good. Because it was one of those endings that just kept repeating something and drawing out. And where we cut it sounded like an ending. So we're not going to do these measures. Everybody take pencil, cross them out. And as long as they were listening and watching, we could get away with that. So absolutely. There are times when I will simplify and just say, altos, sing with sopranos here, or whatever, just to try and bolster up something that maybe we're weak at.
How long does it take you to get comfortable? Like, talk about beating someone, and well, I'll do, you know, four times. I won't keep like, just talk to something like that.
It will take you forever if you never start trying. And sometimes you just have to practice it, and maybe it's just one cue at a time, right? Where you're just like, okay, I'm gonna, and you can't concentrate on this. And that part of that's the thing is, can you get to the point where you can beat with one hand? This is how I know something. If I know a piece, if I can play it and have a conversation with someone, because I'm not 110% invested in what I'm doing. And so if I'm not 100% comfortable with what my other hand's doing, there's no chance that I'm going to throw this hand in. Right? This is weird to me right now, to lead right-handed and then cue left-handed, because that's not how I do it. And so I would practice it, and I practice it. And there's nothing wrong with, like, okay, if you think they can keep going without you beating. And there are some times where, speaking of beating, you can actually conduct lyrically. Like, you don't have to conduct, right? If you got a pianist that you know is they're just gonna hammer it home and it's gonna be great, and you've got a weird rhythm, sometimes you can just be like, bum, 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 bum. You can give them the rhythm, right? I'm not conducting in the sense that I'm keeping the metric pulse, but I'm like, okay, I know, and this has happened to you guys with familiar hymns. The arranger gets cute and they add a dot somewhere, and the rhythm's a little bit different. And so we just did far dear than Calvary covers all. Calvary covers, and in one place it goes Calvary covers it all, but in the next place it goes Calvary covers it all, and it's straight. And so I knew, okay, they're never gonna learn this. They're gonna get in the groove, and they're gonna sing it how they've sung it for 30 years. And so I will stop directing, and I will just Calvary covers it all, and I will emphatically remind them, wake them out of their, forgive me, stupor, right? Because we all get that way, right? We just sing, we're not paying attention. Oh, what just happened? Was that light green? I sure hope so. Right? We do that. We do that when we sing too, especially if you know it, right? And so I got to get their attention, and then dot 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 dot, and I'll direct lyrically as opposed to trying to keep the beat, whatever it happens to be. So I would just every now and then just try it and see what happens. The best way to get comfortable, I have found, is just do both hands in congregational singing, because it's a mirror, right? And in my mind, down, out, in, down, out, in. Now, don't do that when it's hymn favorites night and, junior high Johnny comes out and it's like, I want to sing, 492. And we always tell them, look, if we don't know it, you have to lead it. That never happens. We always end up trying to lead it. But don't do that when you're, you like, I got to really concentrate on this. But do it when you're like Victor and Jesus. Old story. Just get that other hand comfortable, and you will feel incredibly awkward. It's one of those things. I think creating new neurological pathways in your brain is one of those things where you feel like, I can't, I did it. I feel like there's no progress. Like, oh, I'm getting better at this. You actually feel like you're getting worse. I can't, and then just one day that pathway, I think of it like a tunnel. It's completed, and then you're like, I did it. Because in your brain, your hands are tied to each other. And unless you've ever done something, yeah, and maybe you just pull the plug and you just go all non-dominant hand. Be like, this is my non-dominant hand service. And then you can literally, you suffer the embarrassment. You just say it to the church, like, hey, I'm trying to get better with my other hand. So if it looks goofy, that's why. And then they laugh at you, right? Yeah, this is my non-dominant hand service, right? That's it. That's right. The ushers are going to hands. Teachers are going to write on the board with their non-dominant hands, right? Also, that Brother Terry can feel comfortable sitting with his non-dominant. Shake left-handed. That's right. You're onto something, preacher. So, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Text is the best way. Like, hey, what does this mean? Oh, I don't know. Let's find out. But certainly not a problem. Anything else? I realize not a lot of this applies to maybe the ministry you're in right now, but I think as preacher wanted it geared towards somebody who's going into the ministry, you never know what they'll come up with in some other places. Like, I need to start a choir. I need to, at the very least, and they may think, because I had this happen all the time, guys will go out and they'll join youth ministry, and then be like, man, I'm so glad I had the notes from that because I didn't ever think I was going to lead the choir. And then they'll go back and look at it, and it may be completely out of their mind for 10 years, and they'll be like, where are my notes? Because I just need to have someone start from scratch. Yes, ma'am. You can. Usually, what I do is I look at the note values they choose to use, um, and I look at the piano part and see how. I will say this. So think of a song like a hymn like "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." "Mighty Fortress Is Our God." It feels like it has new notes every. It has new notes every word. The reason it has new notes every word is because it's so slow that if you don't change notes every word, it just gets stale. But faster songs like Victory in Jesus, you'll see the alto line is like just straight across and the tenor line, and nothing is moving because when you move fast, if you move a lot, nobody can process that, right? I can't have the same level of musical complexity at a fast tempo as I can at a slow tempo. So I look at it and I start to see like, okay, we're not moving. So if you look at the very introduction of this song, God and God Alone. By the way, those symbols above the piano part are chord symbols. And so, if perchance you had a pianist who could not read the music, but they could read chords, they could feasibly play this and kind of make their way through it. But if you look at the second measure, notice how there's four chord symbols in that measure. That to me indicates we're going somewhat slow because if I was going fast, then there's just no way that you're going to process all that. You're not even going to hear it. It's just going to sound mushy. But if I go slow, then I end up with, and I can very clearly hear all four chord changes. So sometimes I use that. If they don't have a quarter note equals whatever, usually they'll have some kind of adjective, descriptive adjective. They should. If they don't, shame on them. Like even if it just said with much reverence, the idea of reverence is going to indicate this a more ponderous pace. So if I start saying God and God alone created all, and you feel it too, you're like, why are we in fast forward, right? Why do we sound like the Chipmunks? But at the same time, if you're like, I heard an old story, it's going to take me like days to get through the poetic thought, and so you can kind of feel like, well, that's too slow. And you start to come up with your own. And then the app I actually have, if you're like, well, I don't know what tempo that is, you can tap and it'll tell you the beats per minute to whatever you're tapping to, as long as you keep a steady time. So that can be helpful. And sometimes I'll do that and I'll write it in. And sometimes I don't like the tempo that they choose. Sometimes it's because my choir can't enunciate that fast. Like I cannot. Okay, we're gonna have to get slower. Because we can't spit all the words. The other thing is we just had to do this. I sang a solo with the choir in the background, and we had to speed up because they didn't have the breath support to make it all the way through the phrase. So, all right, we got to go faster. And I had to remind myself and the pianist, okay, we're going to keep this. We're going to keep this going a little bit, which was faster than what they had said. But no, that's a very good question. Anything else? Appreciate it. That's all I got. Yeah. Well, let's pray, and then we will go on our merry ways. Father, we thank you that we could come, and thank you for the joys of music that it brings to our life. Thank you that we can give it all to thee and we can worship thee, and that because of Christ we have salvation, and we have a God to whom we can worship, we can pray. We have a God who's alive, and we're grateful for that. We pray that you would help us as we go into whatever aspect of the ministry that you have placed us in, that we would do so with our whole hearts, that we would desire to improve. We would desire to encourage others in their goals in the ministry to serve you with their whole hearts. We pray that this would have been a help, and we pray that you give us safety as we go our separate ways. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.